My name is Naomi Carter, and for as long as I can remember, faith has been the anchor of my life. Each morning started with prayer, each evening ended with scripture, and every Sunday found me in the same place, on the middle pew of my church, singing praises and listening attentively to the pastor. My community viewed me as a woman of deep conviction, someone who embodied a life of faith and service. I wasn't a pastor or a leader, I was just Naomi, the woman who people called when they needed prayers, a listening ear, or a word of encouragement. My life revolved around God, or at least I thought it did. I truly believed I was walking the right path, but there was an uneasiness I couldn't explain, a feeling that something wasn't quite as it should be. My family life mirrored what some would call a picture-perfect Christian household. My husband Daniel and I raised our 2 teenagers, Ella and Benjamin, in the church. Bible study, youth group meetings, family prayers. We did it all. Our home reflected those values too, modest, inviting, and full of warmth. To outsiders, we must have seemed like the ideal Christian family. But sometimes, in the still of the night, doubt would creep in. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering, was this what faith was supposed to feel like? Something deep inside me questioned whether I truly understood what it meant to follow Jesus. Sure, I checked all the boxes, daily devotions, Sunday worship, volunteering at every opportunity. But was I missing the bigger picture? One evening, I visited Sister Evelyn, a dear friend from church. She had always been a pillar of faith, someone I admired and often turned to for guidance. Sitting in her cluttered yet cozy living room, we talked over tea, laughing about old stories and sharing updates about the congregation. But there was a moment, something about the way Evelyn hesitated as she looked down at her hands, that made my heart stop. "Naomi," she said softly, "can I tell you something?" "Of course," I replied, leaning in to listen. She hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as she clutched her teacup. "I feel like something is missing. I pray, I read my Bible, I go to church, but I don't feel him anymore." Her words hit me like a wave crashing against the shore. Sister Evelyn, the woman whose faith seemed unshakable, was admitting to feeling disconnected from God. I reached across the table and took her hands in mine. "Maybe it's just a season," I said, trying to comfort her. "God is always near, even when we don't feel him. Keep praying, Evelyn. Keep believing." She nodded, but the look in her eyes betrayed a deeper struggle. And as I drove home that night, her confession lingered in my thoughts. Could Evelyn be right? Was something missing? I couldn't ignore the little things I'd noticed in church lately, how the sermons, while uplifting, seemed to lack the depth they once had. How the pews were full, but there was an undercurrent of distraction, of people going through the motions. Was it just Evelyn's struggle, or was it something more? As I turned down the dark, empty road toward home, my mind raced with questions. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, trying to push the doubts away. Church is fine. My faith is fine. Everything is fine, I told myself. But the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. Then it happened. A loud pop shattered the silence, and the car jerked violently to the side. I screamed, my hands gripping the wheel tightly as the vehicle skidded out of control. The guardrail loomed ahead, too close, too fast. I tried to brake, but it was no use. The crunch of metal, the force of impact, it all happened in an instant. And then I was falling. The headlights illuminated the rushing river below just long enough for me to realize what was happening. The icy water swallowed the car whole, and the next few moments were a blur of panic. Water rushed in from every direction, freezing and suffocating. My hands fumbled with the seatbelt, trembling as I tried to free myself. I gasped for air, but there was none. My lungs burned, my vision blurred, and as the darkness closed in, one thought consumed me. This is it, I'm dying. It all started as just another ordinary day, but I would later realize that nothing about that day was ordinary. Autumn hung in the air, its crispness sharp and cool, like a reminder that change was inevitable. I spent the first part of the morning running errands, slipping into my usual rhythm, chores, schedules, planning. Life felt predictably safe, but beneath the surface, I could sense something, a faint unease I couldn't explain. I tried not to dwell on it. My mind returned to Sister Evelyn's words from the day before, circling like a whisper I couldn't silence. Her confession weighed heavily on me. I feel like something is missing. I read the Bible, I pray, I attend church, but I don't feel him anymore. That sense of disconnection from God unsettled me deeply. If Evelyn, a woman I had always looked up to, could admit to such a struggle, what did that say about my own faith? Did I truly know him, or was I just following habits and routines? I shook my head, attempting to banish the thought. My faith was fine, wasn't it? Church was full every Sunday. People smiled, sang, listened. We gathered, we praised, we carried on. But lately, I couldn't deny that something felt lacking. Just like Evelyn said, services were uplifting, but where was the conviction, the fire, the transformation? My grip on the steering wheel tightened as I mulled over these doubts. Surely it was just my imagination. Surely everything was as it should be. The road stretched out before me, lined with rows of golden trees whose leaves fluttered in the breeze like whispers from another world. The hum of the car was soothing, almost hypnotic, and I allowed myself to relax for a moment. My thoughts drifted toward the errands I had completed earlier and the groceries stacked neatly beside me on the passenger seat. For a brief moment, life felt steady, predictable. Then it happened. The loud pop of a bursting tire jolted me violently back to reality. The car lurched to the right with terrifying force, and my instincts took over. I gripped the steering wheel so hard it felt like my hands might break, my foot slamming the brake pedal in a panicked attempt to stop the inevitable. But it was useless. The car skidded across the road, spinning wildly as it veered toward the guardrail. Time slowed to an agonizing crawl. The guardrail loomed ahead, closer and closer, and I knew I couldn't avoid it. Metal crunched, folding like paper as the car collided with the barrier. The impact sent a jarring shock through my entire body, my head snapping forward as the airbag exploded in front of me. And then, just as I thought it couldn't get worse, I felt the weightlessness, a nauseating sensation as the car pitched over the edge, falling toward the icy river below. I screamed. The headlights illuminated the rushing water for a brief, horrifying moment before the car plunged into its depths, the force of the impact knocking the breath from my lungs. The freezing water surged in immediately, filling the car from every angle like an unrelenting tide. Panic clawed at my chest as I struggled to unbuckle my seatbelt. My trembling hands fumbled hopelessly, too weak to free myself. The water rose higher and higher, stealing what little air remained. My lungs burned as I gasped for oxygen, but there was none. Darkness closed in, consuming everything. This is it, I thought, the realization piercing through the chaos. I am dying. As the cold overtook me, I expected pain. I expected fear. Drowning was supposed to be terrifying, wasn't it? But in those final moments, something strange happened. Instead of agony, there was peace, a profound calm that settled over me like a warm blanket. The struggle ceased. The burning in my lungs faded. The cold no longer mattered. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the car. I wasn't underwater. I wasn't drowning. I was somewhere else. The first thing I noticed was the air. It wasn't just air. It felt alive, as if every breath carried more than oxygen. It filled me with an indescribable peace, so complete and pure that it felt as though I had never truly breathed before. Light surrounded me, but it wasn't blinding or harsh. It seemed to emanate from everywhere and everything, as if the very space around me was aglow with divine presence. I turned slowly, taking in my surroundings. The ground beneath me was unlike anything I'd ever known. Not earth, not stone, not anything familiar. It was solid, yet weightless. Colors exploded around me, vivid, radiant, impossibly beautiful, as if I'd been seeing through a fog my entire life and now, finally, it had lifted. And then I felt him. I didn't hear footsteps. There was no sound to announce his arrival. But suddenly, I knew, without a doubt, that I wasn't alone. Every ounce of love, every sense of belonging, every feeling of safety I had ever experienced was compressed into this moment. It was overwhelming, yet perfectly calm. I turned, and there he was. Jesus. He stood a few feet away, his gaze resting on me like a gentle embrace. I expected terror, awe, collapse, but all I felt was love. Pure, unfiltered, all-consuming love. It filled the air around us, pouring into me with such intensity that I thought I might break apart and be rebuilt in the same instant. He didn't speak right away. He simply watched me, and in that silence I felt everything. Every mistake I had made, every moment of doubt, every time I had claimed to follow him but merely followed ritual. It wasn't condemnation. He wasn't angry, but the sorrow in his eyes was more painful than any judgment could have been. Not just sorrow for me, but for all of us. Tears welled up in my eyes. I wanted to speak, to explain, to apologize. But no words came. What could I possibly say? He already knew. Finally, he spoke. "Come, there is something you must see." His voice wasn't just sound. It resonated within me, through every fiber of my being. It was gentle yet powerful, soft yet commanding. The world around us shifted as he spoke, the glowing space disappearing. Suddenly, I was somewhere else entirely. A city stretched before me, alive and shimmering. Every street, every building, every surface pulsed with light that seemed to come from within. It wasn't just beautiful, it was holy. I saw people moving, not hurriedly, not burdened, but joyfully. Their faces radiated an unchanging happiness, a true and eternal joy that didn't fade with circumstances. Some of them I recognized, loved ones who had passed, friends I hadn't seen in years. Their eyes met mine and they smiled, not just any smile, but a knowing smile, as if they understood everything I couldn't yet comprehend, but I couldn't move toward them. Jesus was still beside me, his gaze steady and unyielding, and then his expression changed. Grief clouded his eyes. "Now, I will show you what has happened." I awoke to a sensation unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the sting of cold river water, nor the dull ache of my body battered by the crash. There was no pain, no fear. Only peace, complete, overwhelming peace. It felt as if I had been cocooned in warmth, even though I was nowhere near warmth as I understood it on earth. When I opened my eyes, I found myself standing. Somehow my trembling hands and drowning lungs, the car, the river, all of it, were gone. And where I stood was beyond anything my mind could grasp. Every instinct I had screamed that I should be afraid, confused, maybe even despairing, but those feelings had no place here. They could not touch me, as if the air itself refused to hold them. The air, it was alive. That was the first thing I noticed. Breathing, it wasn't just filling my lungs, it was as if I was absorbing it into my soul. It wasn't oxygen, it was more. It filled me with a sense of belonging, of completeness I didn't know I had been missing until this moment. I looked around me. The space was vast and boundless, yet somehow intimate. It felt as though the universe had shrunk to this one moment, this one place, made just for me. Light surrounded me, not blinding, not harsh, but soft and all-encompassing. It didn't cast shadows. It came from everything and nothing all at once, as if the light wasn't just present but alive, gently pulsing like the very heartbeat of this place. Colors danced in the light. They weren't just colors as I knew them, red, blue, green, but shades and hues I had no words for, no way to describe, no context to compare them to. It was as though I was seeing for the first time, with eyes that could finally comprehend what beauty truly was. And then I felt it. Him. The presence reached me before I saw him. It was the gentlest pull, the softest whisper, but it shook me more deeply than anything I had ever known. Imagine being wrapped in every ounce of love you've ever felt in your life, all at once multiplied 1,000-fold. Now imagine that love wasn't just a feeling, but a person. That's what it was like. I turned, and there he was, Jesus. He didn't move toward me, yet I felt him draw nearer with every breath I took. He didn't speak, yet his presence was louder, clearer than any voice. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to hold the entirety of eternity within them. They weren't just kind, or soft, or piercing. They were knowing. He knew me. Not just the person I tried to be, the face I showed the world, but all of me, my hopes, my fears, my failures, my victories, my doubts, everything. I didn't need to ask if it was really him. I knew. Not with my mind, but with my soul. My knees gave out beneath me. I fell, not out of fear or obligation, but because standing seemed impossible in the presence of this much holiness, this much love. Tears streamed down my face before I could stop them. For what felt like forever, he said nothing. He simply watched me, his gaze steady and unyielding, yet so full of love it was almost unbearable. And in that silence, I felt it all. My own shortcomings, every moment I had gone through the motions of faith without truly seeking him, every time I had spoken his name but failed to live by it. But there was no anger in his eyes, no condemnation, only sorrow. It hurt more than any punishment ever could. That sorrow, it wasn't just for me, it was for all of us, for the times we've turned away, not because we didn't believe, but because we let the world drown out his voice. For the times we replaced relationship with routine, for the times we thought we were following him, but were only following ourselves. I tried to speak, to apologize, to explain, but the words stuck in my throat. What could I possibly say? He already knew everything I wanted to confess. Finally he moved, not toward me, but beside me. His presence was so overwhelming that I hadn't noticed before how everything around us seemed to shift as he did. The light, the colors, the air itself, all of it responded to him, not out of obligation but out of love, as if everything in this place existed only to glorify him. He knelt beside me, his hand outstretched. When I didn't take it immediately, he waited, not impatiently, not sternly, but gently, as if to say, "I'll always wait for you." I reached for him. The moment my hand touched his, the world around us changed. It wasn't jarring, like flipping a switch or waking from a dream. It was seamless, natural, as if the shift had been waiting for this exact moment. Suddenly, we were no longer standing in that glowing expanse. We were somewhere else entirely. I gasped. A city stretched out before us, radiant and alive. It wasn't like any city I'd ever seen, not built of stone or steel, not made by human hands. Every building, every street, every surface seemed to pulse with the same light that had surrounded me moments before. But here, the light didn't just surround, it emanated. From within, it was as though the city itself was alive, praising him with every fiber of its existence. And the people, oh the people, they moved with purpose but not hurriedly. They laughed, but not in the shallow way we often do on earth. Their joy was deep, unshakable, as if it flowed directly from the source of all joy. Their faces radiated peace and belonging. Some of them I recognized, faces from my past, loved ones who had gone before me. They smiled at me, their eyes filled with a knowing I couldn't yet understand. I wanted to run to them, to embrace them, to cry and laugh and talk about all the things I had missed. But I couldn't move, not because I wasn't able, but because I wasn't allowed. Jesus was still beside me, his gaze fixed on something ahead. I turned to follow his eyes. That's when I saw it. Far in the distance, past the glowing streets and joyful faces, was something dim. It wasn't darkness exactly, not the absence of light, but the absence of life. A shadow, lingering at the edges of this perfect city, waiting. Jesus turned to me. His expression hadn't changed. There was still love, still peace, but now there was also grief. "There is more to see," he said. His voice resonated, not just in my ears, but in my soul. It carried weight, truth, a depth I couldn't begin to describe. I nodded, unable to speak, and followed him as the world around us began to shift again. After my overwhelming encounter, I felt as if the very fabric of my life had been rewoven. Emerging from that radiant, otherworldly realm, I carried within me a new vision, a perspective that forever altered how I saw the world, faith, and even myself. In the quiet moments after the vision, I remembered Jesus' gentle command, "There is something you must see." And so, as I walked beside him, the familiar contours of my earthly existence began to transform. I found myself in a place that resembled my hometown, but not as I had known it. The streets, the buildings, the very faces of the people now carried an undeniable weight of truth that had always been hidden in plain sight. Every morning when I used to rush through my routine, prayers, Bible readings, church services, I barely scratched the surface of a much deeper reality. Now I was able to see the layers that had built up around my faith like the dust on a neglected shelf. In this new light, I noticed that the church, an institution that had once been my sanctuary, now appeared as a grand structure filled with echoes. I saw its towering spires and stained glass windows, symbols of a heritage built on devotion. Yet, behind each sacred facade lay an unspoken truth. Many had come to worship the building instead of the living God. I watched as groups clustered inside the bright interiors, their voices raised in song and prayer, but the fervor was dulled by routine. There was a serenity in their expression, yet an absence of genuine hunger, a sense that they were merely performing a ritual rather than engaging in transformative communion with the divine. I recalled the countless Sundays when I would join the congregation, confident in our collective proclamation of faith. Now, I realized that behind warm greetings and familiar hymns, many hearts had grown complacent. The beauty of our traditions had been gradually replaced by automatic responses. The sacred had been watered down to suit a world that demanded convenience over conviction. I felt a deep sorrow as I saw how the very essence of worship had been clouded by the passage of time and the distractions of modern life. Walking further, I noticed the subtle, almost invisible, burdens carried by many. It wasn't until that moment that I recognized the quiet resignation of those I once admired, the preachers, the church elders, and even my fellow believers. Their eyes told stories of battles fought quietly behind confident smiles. They too had become ensnared in a cycle of habits, where the heart's yearning for an authentic encounter with God was slowly suffocated by the need to simply fit in. My eyes widened as I saw how even my own life had taken on this pattern. I remembered my countless nights spent in personal prayer, where I recited words out of habit rather than from the depths of my soul. I recognized the familiar echo of empty routines, the very routines that had made me believe I was secure in my faith. And it hit me with a resounding clarity. True spirituality required more than just knowledge or attendance. It demanded vulnerability, a call to tear down the false barriers we constructed around our hearts. As I observed, Jesus turned his gaze toward me, and in his eyes I saw both compassion and a firm resolve. "This is not meant to be mere tradition," he seemed to say through the quiet power of his presence. "You must see past the surface and uncover the living truth within every moment." His words resonated throughout the space, stirring something deep within me. At that moment, the distinction between what was done and what was truly meant began to blur. I realized that the authenticity of our relationship with God had been compromised by our fear of discomfort and change. Instead of embracing the full, sometimes messy reality of spiritual life, we sought refuge in what was easy and familiar. I began to see the world with unprecedented clarity. Everyday activities, once banal and routine, now shimmered with the potential for genuine encounter. The rustle of leaves on a quiet street, the distant laughter of a child, even the simple act of a stranger's kind smile awakened something within me. A reminder that life itself was an invitation to approach the divine directly. In that moment of revelation, I was struck by the call to not only awaken for myself, but to urge others to awaken as well. It was as if a door had been flung open inside my heart, letting in light and hope, and I knew I carried a responsibility not to remain silent. I had been granted this new perspective, so that I might help others see beyond the routines and the comfortable veneer. Viewing life through this lens, I saw that true faith was a journey of constant discovery, a call to break the chains of complacency and to reach out in honest, unguarded trust. As I continued walking beside Jesus, the scenery began to blend into symbols of both caution and promise. There were quiet corners shadowed by memories of old regrets and unhealed wounds, reminding me of the personal chains each of us carried. And then there were radiant spaces filled with possibility, the spaces where gratitude and humility interwove with the simple act of believing. It was a world of dichotomies, a world in which darkness and light existed side by side, each defining and refining the other. The new perspective was not meant to dismantle tradition altogether, but to realign it with its original purpose, a genuine, dynamic relationship with God. I realized that the church, and all its beautiful architecture and rituals, held great value only when our hearts beat in synchrony with the call for transformation. This awakening was a plea to return to the core, a reminder that true worship begins when we look inward and meet God not as a distant ideal, but as an intimate, ever-present friend. Standing there, heart wide open, I made a silent vow. I would not let this moment fade into the mists of memory. I must share this vision, this clarity, with every soul willing to listen. I would challenge the comforts of routine and beckon others to rediscover the deep transformational love that waits for each of us when we dare to live our faith authentically. I walked alongside Jesus as our vision shifted once again, and this time I was granted a glimpse into the hidden burdens that weighed down so many lives. What unfolded before me was both familiar and startling, a mirror of the world as I thought I knew it, overlaid with invisible bonds that no one else seemed to see. As I wandered along a bustling city street, I began to notice subtle traces of chains wrapped around people's lives. These weren't metallic shackles, but rather invisible links forged by daily burdens, unfulfilled desires, and the quiet pressures of modern existence. I saw a businessman in a crisp suit striding with purpose, his eyes locked on his phone. To the casual onlooker, he exuded confidence. Yet as I looked closer, I perceived delicate, almost imperceptible shackles around his wrists. Chains of ambition, fear of failure, and an insatiable drive for success that left him exhausted and unfulfilled. Despite his apparent control, he was bound by expectations he could never truly escape. Not far away, a woman stood before a store window, meticulously examining her reflection. Her face, framed by carefully chosen accessories, betrayed a hidden discontent. I realized she was encircled by chains of comparison and a desperate need for validation. Every glance in the mirror was a reminder of how she measured herself against an ever-changing ideal, a burden that kept her from recognizing the inherent worth already bestowed upon her. In her silent struggle, I could sense the quiet pain of someone trapped by the constant quest to be perceived as enough. As I moved through the scene with Jesus by my side, the full scope of these unseen chains became even clearer. In a small cafe, I observed a group of people who, on ordinary days, would gather to share both food and faith. Today, however, their eyes were vacant, their smiles automatic. They attended each Sunday service, recited familiar prayers, and sang well-worn hymns, yet something essential was missing. I sensed that many of them were chained by routine, living their faith on autopilot, while the spark of genuine spiritual hunger dwindled beneath layers of habit and complacency. The vision didn't spare even those regarded as spiritual leaders. I witnessed pastors and religious teachers who, in their eagerness to comfort and inspire, had wrapped themselves in chains of compromise. Their sermons, adorned with eloquence and polished rhetoric, often skirted the raw, uncomfortable truths about repentance and transformation. Their messages had been watered down to appeal to the masses, creating a facade of security while leaving deeper spiritual hunger unaddressed. In their hearts, I saw a struggle, a longing to return to authenticity that remained all too buried beneath the expectations of their audience. In that moment, an uncomfortable truth began to emerge within me as well. I recalled evenings when I had recited prayers mechanically, when the words were more ritual than soul-to-soul conversation with God. I remembered times when I clung to the comfort of tradition, even though I sensed that something vital was missing. The chains I was witnessing in others were not foreign to me. I, too, had allowed routine and external pressures to obscure the true essence of my faith. Then Jesus turned his compassionate gaze upon me. In the depths of his eyes, I saw both sorrow and gentle determination. His soft yet resolute voice broke the silence. "The chains you see are not meant to imprison you, but to call you into awareness." Each syllable resonated deeply, stirring me to confront not only the visible bonds around others, but also the ones that held my own heart captive. I felt a profound yearning to break free, both for myself and for those around me who remained unaware of their bondage. Every chain represented an attachment, the fear of stepping out of comfort, the endless pursuit of worldly success, and the unyielding comparison that robbed us of our true identity. Recognizing these connections was the first step toward liberation. Walking away from the busy street scene, I pondered the significance of what I had witnessed. The invisible chains, though unnoticed by most, were a reminder of the cost of living a life half awake, going through motions without true engagement. They called out for a transformation that would require vulnerability, honest introspection, and above all, a return to the genuine relationship with God that transcends ritual. Even as the vision began to soften and fade into the background, the lesson remained etched on my soul. I resolved to no longer let the weight of external expectations, unexamined habits, or the pursuit of mere appearances bind me. Instead, I embraced the idea that awareness was the key that could unlock these chains, a key forged in honesty, love, and devotion to the true essence of faith. In that quiet moment, it became clear the path to freedom lay in recognizing and releasing these chains. I would carry this understanding back into my life, committed to seeking a deeper, more authentic connection with God and to gently guiding others toward the same liberation. It was a call to live fully, to see beyond the surface, and to break free from the bonds that keep us from experiencing the richness of a life lived in true light. As I continued my journey with Jesus, the next vision unfolded before me like a slowly peeling layer of a familiar mask. I found myself in a vast sanctuary, a grand church filled with rows of seats, flickering candlelight, and stained glass windows that once promised heavenly beauty. Yet as I looked closer, I sensed a profound disconnect between the facade of devotion and the beating hearts of those inside. I stepped into the pews, though it felt more like an observer than a participant now. Every face I saw displayed a certain weariness and detachment that cut deeper than any physical pain. People sat with heads bowed, reciting words that resonated with centuries of tradition, yet their inner voices were silent. It was as if the power of genuine worship had been replaced by rote recitation. I could see in their eyes a longing, a hunger for something real, but the connection seemed lost amid familiar routines and complacency. I turned my gaze toward the pulpit. There, a preacher stood with an air of confidence and eloquence, his voice booming across the sanctuary. His words were carefully chosen and delivered with conviction, yet behind the polished delivery lay a hollowness I struggled to ignore. I realized this was not the passion of a soul set ablaze by the truth, but rather the performance of someone who had forgotten why they first embraced the message. The preacher's smile, practiced and distant, revealed that what was really needed was not another sermon but a revival of true connection, a return to experiencing faith in its most raw and personal form. Nearby, I observed worship leaders positioned in a state-of-the-art studio, a modern counterpoint to the traditional sanctuary. They sang and played instruments with technical perfection, yet, as I listened, I could see that the soulful intimacy of genuine praise was missing. Their eyes were fixated on cameras and screens, on ensuring that their performance delivered the right visual impact, rather than inviting hearts to encounter the divine. The music, although beautiful in its arrangement, lacked the spontaneous fire that comes from a direct, unmediated encounter with God. As I moved through the rows, I saw families and individuals who, on the surface, radiated the comfort of communal faith. But a careful look revealed that many were simply fulfilling an obligation, a social or cultural ritual, rather than engaging in heartfelt conversation with the Creator. Little did they know that their gestures of worship were reduced to mere routines, their prayers merely echoes of words memorized in childhood. I felt a pang of sorrow for these souls, for I knew the true connection with Jesus was meant to be an ever-living, ever-active relationship, not a passive checklist of activities. Then I encountered a group of young believers huddled together during a quiet moment before the service. Their eyes wandered aimlessly, each lost in thoughts that bore little of spiritual yearning. Their expressions whispered of doubts and distractions, of lives caught between the hustle of modern living and the weight of ancient expectations. I felt compelled to reach out to them, to remind them that deep down, every heart still thirsted for authentic love and truth. But in that moment, I was merely a silent witness as their lost connection remained unheeded. I looked upward, hoping for guidance in this scene of spiritual neglect, and that's when I saw him again. Jesus stood at the front of the sanctuary, not elevated above the people by a grand platform, but gently among them, his eyes reflecting both profound sorrow and unwavering love. His gaze seemed to pierce through the layers of ritual, seeing each heart with clarity. His expression spoke of a grief not born of anger but of deep lament for every soul that had allowed the sacred gift of a personal encounter with him to lapse into routine. Whispering softly, he said, "My children, you have strayed far from the intimacy we once shared." Hearing those gentle words, my heart ached with the truth of his observation. I reflected on my own life, remembering the times I allowed comfort and habit to dilute the vibrancy of my faith. Had I not, too, lost connection in the monotony of everyday devotion? The realization was both painful and transformative. The church, the traditions, even the meticulously planned sermons, all had become vehicles by which we were distanced from the living presence of God. The vision shifted subtly as I witnessed how this disconnect affected the very essence of community. In one corner of the sanctuary, an elderly woman sat alone, her eyes moist with a silent yearning that belied her outward composure. Across the aisle, a father cradled his sleeping child, his expression vacant as if his soul were wandering far away. Every face I saw bore the subtle marks of a spirituality diminished, a spirituality that had once been a powerful, unbreakable bond with the Savior. In that charged moment, I knew I could not remain a passive witness. The lost connection was not just a spectacle for my eyes, it was a call to change, a plea for revival, and a summons for every heart to rediscover the essence of true worship. I felt an intense impulse to reach out, to break this chain of routine, and to remind every soul in that sanctuary what it truly meant to be alive in the Spirit. But then the vision faded, leaving me standing alone in a soft light with Jesus by my side. In the quiet after the storm of images, his hand rested lightly on my shoulder, and I heard him say, "Remember, the connection lies not in external rituals, but in the meeting of hearts with mine. Seek me earnestly, and I will restore all that has been lost." His words resonated deeply within me, stirring an inner resolve to live differently, to reject complacency, and to nurture a relationship with him that was vibrant, honest, and alive. As the vision dissolved into the gentle glow of mercy and understanding, I carried with me the painful yet hopeful truth. The lost connection was not an irreversible state, but a call to return, to reclaim the intimacy we were meant to have with our Creator. The journey ahead would demand courage, self-reflection, and the willingness to break free from shallow practices. Yet, in that moment of divine command, I felt an unwavering spark of hope that together we could rediscover what it truly means to be connected to Jesus. Since that day in the sanctuary of lost connection, a quiet urgency stirred within me, a longing to break through complacency and call the wandering hearts back to their Creator. I walked for what felt like hours in a shifting landscape of memory, hope, and gentle admonition, until I found myself alone once more with Jesus. The space around us, though still touched by the vibrant glow of divine light, now carried a solemn tone, a reverent pause before an important decree. Jesus turned toward me, his eyes both tender and commanding. "Naomi," he said in a voice that vibrated through every fiber of my being, "it is time for you to return with my message. They have strayed far from me. Their hearts have wandered in the maze of routine and worldly desire. Tell them to return, to come back to me." I felt as though the words were etched directly into my soul. The command was both a burden and a blessing, a call to risk vulnerability for the sake of truth. My mind raced with doubts. How could I be the one to deliver such a weighty message? Was I not already lost in the habitual patterns of a misguided faith? Yet beneath my uncertainties burned a fervent conviction born of the deep intimacy I'd experienced in that luminous realm. Closing my eyes for a moment, I allowed the gravity of the summons to settle into my heart. Every past error, every half-hearted prayer, and every semblance of routine worship washed over me in a torrent of raw honesty. I recalled the countless Sundays spent on autopilot, words recited without meaning, hymns sung without genuine encounter. In that recollection, I recognized my own estrangement from the living presence of Jesus. Now, I was given the chance to correct this course, not just for myself, but for everyone whose eyes I might meet with the spark of repentance. He continued, "Return them to me, Naomi. Speak openly about the emptiness of traditions and the shallowness of routines. Let every word, every gesture you offer be an invitation to rediscover a relationship with me that is alive, vibrant, and transformative." I could hardly breathe as the reality of my new mission took hold. In that luminous space where time seemed both suspended and relentless, I saw visions of souls far and wide, families gathered around flickering screens of comfort, friends distracted by endless chatter, churches filled with echoes rather than voices of yearning. The images reminded me of all the chains I had witnessed, the ties that bound people to a false sense of security, a counterfeit spirituality devoid of real connection. Now, my heart ached with responsibility. I was to be the herald of a return, a guide for those who had long forgotten the warmth of an intimate encounter with the divine. I asked him tentatively, "But Lord, how can I reach them? How do I break through the silence of indifference and the clamor of routine?" His reply was steady, imbued with both authority and gentle mercy. "You must be honest, Naomi. Speak with the vulnerability of one who has been reborn. Let them see your doubts and your journey. Do not mask your weaknesses, rather, let your truth be the lamp that lights their path." The call to return is not merely about preaching, it is about living it every single day. In that moment, a surge of determination filled me. I remembered all the times I had quietly followed others, never questioning, never daring to ask, "Am I really living for him?" There and then, I vowed that I would no longer let fear silence my truth. I would share my journey of brokenness and renewal as a beacon for others lost in their comfort zones. The vision slowly shifted once again, and I found myself standing at the threshold of a gathering, a modest hall where a small group of souls waited, their faces marked by quiet weariness and hidden longing. It was a scene reminiscent of home, yet every pair of eyes there seemed to beg for something more. I felt the weight of my responsibility as I stepped forward. Though my heart pounded in my chest, I knew this was the moment to act. Reflecting on Jesus' command, I began to speak, not with perfect eloquence, but with raw honesty. I spoke of my own struggles, of the nights spent wondering if I was truly seeking him, of the days where routine had dulled my once fiery passion. I confessed how I had seen the chains that bound each of us. Chains of fear, of habit, of the comfortable lies we told ourselves. I explained that the message was clear. To return to Jesus was to reclaim the vibrant intimacy that is our birthright. Each word I uttered was laced with both remorse for past complacency and hope for the future. As I spoke, I felt the energy in the room shift from indifference to attentive silence. Faces, once etched with sorrowful resignation, began to soften with the possibility of renewal. I saw eyes widen in recognition, some welling with tears, others shining with newfound determination. In that moment, I knew that the command had taken root. The call to return was piercing through the layers of routine, awakening a longing for something deeper. Jesus' words echoed in my mind, "Speak to them with all the truth that dwells in your heart." I realized that my journey was not just about my redemption, but about instilling a prayerful reckoning in everyone willing to listen. The task was daunting, yet I knew I was not alone. His hand rested on my shoulder, guiding and supporting me through every step. The vision began to fade, leaving me with the resounding promise that the task of calling them to return was the work of a lifetime. Yet, as I slowly regained my sense of self and the remnants of that transcendent realm, I understood that within each returning heart lay the spark of true life, a life that was meant to be lived in constant communion with him. Returning to my everyday world carried with it both the weight of my divine encounter and the burning urgency of my new mission. I had been commanded to call the wandering hearts back to Jesus, a message that now pulsed deep within me. With that mandate in mind, I stepped into familiar surroundings, yet everything felt transformed. I was no longer the same woman who had once simply followed church routines. I was now a bearer of a message that demanded not only truth, but also transformation. The first attempt to share my testimony took place in the quiet warmth of a community center, where people often gathered after Sunday services. I stood before a small group, friends, neighbors, and fellow believers, each face reflecting years of comfort and routine worship. My voice quavered at first as I recounted my experience, the accident, the river, and that transcendent moment when I stood in a realm of luminous peace with Jesus. I spoke of the call to return, a call that demanded not just passive belief, but an active, living relationship with him. Almost immediately, dissent punctured the silence. A well-intentioned yet cautious voice rose among them. "Naomi, are you saying that everything we do in church is meaningless?" It wasn't hostile, but it was laced with doubt. I paused, my heart heavy with the weight of their skepticism. I had never intended to diminish the value of tradition or community, and yet I could see now that too many had come to rely on ritual without ever seeking the intimate experience I had been given. I tried to explain that my vision was not a condemnation of the church as an institution, but rather a wake-up call, a plea for us all to shed the chains of routine and rediscover the raw, unmediated connection with Jesus. It's not about rejecting our traditions, I said softly, but about embracing a deeper truth that lies beyond the familiar. Yet not everyone was ready to listen. As the days unfolded, I began sharing my story at every opportunity. I visited friends at home, lingered after services, and even posted reflections on community bulletin boards. Instead of the enthusiastic embrace I had hoped for, I encountered resistance that stung like a bitter wind. Some questioned the validity of my encounter. "It sounds like a dream," one skeptical neighbor remarked, shaking his head in disbelief. "Maybe your mind was playing tricks on you." Others, hardened by years of comforting routine, dismissed my words as an isolated experience, an anomaly that had little bearing on their own lives. Each rejection fatigued me, but at the same time, it fanned a quiet flame of resolve within my heart. I remembered clearly Jesus' command, "Tell them to return." I sensed that deep within every skeptical eye and hesitant smile, there was a longing, a silent cry for authenticity that had been drowned out by years of empty ritual. Yet the more I attempted to open that door with my story, the more I was met with withdrawal instead of welcome. There were times when the resistance became almost personal. At a small prayer meeting, an elder with kind eyes but steely conviction confronted me. "Naomi, you speak of a return to something that seems very lost in our day. But what if we've already found our own version of connection?" Her words were gentle but unyielding, and in that moment, I could see in her eyes the fear of change, a fear that my words might shatter the little comfort she had built around her faith. I tried to meet her gaze with earnest vulnerability, confessing that I too had been ensnared by that comfort. "I understand," I murmured, because I was once content to follow the routine without questioning. But what I saw changed me. I was shown a truth that calls for living in radical honesty with our Savior. We must risk being uncomfortable to truly know Him. Her silence, heavy as a shroud, confirmed that the battle for genuine connection was not easily won. In public spaces, even whispers of my testimony sparked uncomfortable debates. At times I saw creased foreheads and furrowed brows whenever my story was mentioned. A few brave souls engaged with me, sharing their own doubts and regrets. A father confessing that he'd fallen into a mechanical pattern of prayer, a young woman admitting she felt distant in the midst of crowded church services. These conversations were bittersweet. They gave me hope, yet underscored the enormous challenge of breaking through the hardened layers of convention. Every rejection, every questioning glance, every shaky conversation only deepened my understanding of the call I had received. I realized that the resistance was nothing more than the protective armor of souls unwilling to let go of comfortable illusions. It was an armor forged over decades of social conformity, a safeguard against the vulnerability required to seek true intimacy with Jesus. One evening, after a particularly painful encounter with a friend who dismissed my experience as just imagination, I found myself alone in a quiet park. The gentle sound of wind rustling through the autumn leaves seemed to echo the soft plea of my heart. There, in that calm solitude, I closed my eyes and allowed memories of my divine vision and Jesus' encouraging words to wash over me. "Do not fear the resistance," he whispered in my thoughts. "Every heart has its own journey, and even in doubt, my love remains for all of you." Renewed by that inner confirmation, I silently vowed to persist. I recognized that the path ahead was fraught with challenges, and that many would cling tightly to their routines out of fear of the unknown. Yet the call to return, to embrace a life of genuine, relentless connection with the divine, was a call too urgent to ignore. I knew that even if my words fell on deaf ears for now, seeds were being planted. With patience, vulnerability, and unwavering faith, I would continue to share my story and gently coax those around me to reconsider what it truly meant to worship and to live. In the weeks and months that followed my impassioned testimony, I began to notice a subtle but undeniable change. The resistance I had faced earlier was slowly dissolving into an energy of curiosity, a cautious but genuine desire to explore what it meant to return to Jesus with authenticity. I witnessed, almost imperceptibly at first, the stirring of hearts within my small community. The transformation was not immediate, but it was powerful. One cool Sunday morning, as I walked into the modest community hall where we usually gathered, I sensed a different atmosphere. The air, once heavy with habitual silence and guarded conversations, now buzzed with tentative optimism. I saw familiar faces, but each one carried a hint of longing, a slight openness that spoke of internal battles being fought and won. Some of those who had once dismissed my words now lingered at the edges of conversation, asking quiet questions about what it truly meant to break free from the chains of routine. I began to speak more frequently at these gatherings, not in a sermon-like manner, but through heartfelt conversations. I shared the intimate moments of my own journey, the loneliness before I encountered divine light, the overpowering awe in the presence of Jesus, the painful realization of how easily routine had replaced genuine connection. Every word was laced with vulnerability, and as I spoke, I saw in others a mirrored yearning to know that same truth. Over time, the transformation became visible not only in our discussions but in our actions. Small acts of authentic worship began to emerge. At first, it was as subtle as a pause during a hymn, a moment when someone closed their eyes in earnest prayer rather than singing mechanically. Then, more boldly, a few members initiated heartfelt Bible studies that delved into not only scripture but also personal experience. These meetings were not choreographed events, but raw, unpolished reflections on life, faith, and the struggles that so many of us shared. I remember one particular afternoon clearly, a chilly day when the sky was a soft, wavering gray. I was sitting with a group of believers in a small, candle-lit room, our chairs arranged in a circle. One elderly gentleman, whose name I had long taken for granted, spoke up. With gentle, trembling sincerity, he confessed that for years he had clung to traditions out of habit, afraid to confront the emotional emptiness that defined his life. His voice cracked as he said, "I always attended, always did what I thought was expected, but I never truly met Jesus, until now." In that moment, I felt tears well up in my own eyes. It wasn't just my transformation that was taking hold, it was contagious. A ripple of change spread throughout our community. People began to express their doubts and their pains without fear of judgment. New conversations flourished, a mix of confession, prayer, and mutual support. I witnessed families sitting together not just to recite learned prayers, but to share their struggles, to ask for forgiveness, and to pray for guidance in silent, powerful ways. The traditional forms of worship still had their place, but now they were infused with the raw, honest desire to truly know the living presence of Jesus. Perhaps the most remarkable sign of this transformation was the subtle shift in our gatherings. There were no longer simply rows of people mechanically going through the rituals of service. Instead, each meeting became a tapestry of impromptu expressions of gratitude, moments of tearful confession, and bursts of joy, a chorus of hearts reawakening to the grace of authentic faith. Even those who had once doubted the possibility of change began to find solace in the vulnerability and transparency that we shared. Yet, transformation is never without its challenges. There were moments when old habits resurfaced, when the comfort of routine tempted us to revert to the familiar. I experienced those times too, when the fatigue of change weighed heavily on my spirit, and doubt crept back in, whispering that perhaps I was deluding myself. But during those moments, I would recall the tender yet insistent words of Jesus, urging us to seek Him earnestly and restore all that has been lost. In prayerful solitude, I would view the faces of those I had seen begin to change, and that memory reignited my resolve. Standing amidst this evolving landscape, I realized that transformation was not a destination but a journey, a constant becoming, rather than a finite state. The change I had helped spark in my community was one small note in a symphony of renewal that was far larger than any one of us. It continued to unfold in unexpected places, in the smile of a disaffected youth who now looked upward with hope, in the quiet strength of an older woman who had rediscovered her zeal for prayer, and in the renewed passion of a young family who began to make peace with their past. In those transformative moments, I found my true calling. My experience, my very life, had become a testimony of breaking free from the chains of empty routine into a vibrant, ongoing encounter with truth and love. I finally understood that true transformation required courage, the courage to admit our failures, to embrace the discomfort of change, and most significantly, to trust in the unfailing grace of Jesus. As the days turn into months, and months into a new season of hope, I continue to be both student and teacher in this journey. I remain committed to sharing my story and guiding others toward that genuine connection. For every heart that returns, the light of transformation grows brighter, and the world, however quietly, begins to shift toward the promise of renewal.